For the past 3 years, I had been renting a modest but comfortable 2-bedroom condo from my grandparents. When they passed away last year, they left it to me, a decision they had made long before, ensuring everything was legally secured to prevent any future disputes. Or so they thought. Enter my older brother and his wife. They had been living across the country for years, barely keeping in touch with our grandparents. Yet, as soon as they passed, my brother and his wife suddenly reappeared, acting as if they had been devoted family members all along. At the funeral, they put on a performance worthy of an Oscar, reminiscing about non-existent heartfelt memories. But I knew the truth. My brother hadn't called them in at least 2 years. Not long after, he asked if they could crash at my place for just a couple of weeks while they got settled back in town. Foolishly, I agreed. Those 2 weeks stretched into 3 months. During that time, they treated my condo as if it were their own. My sister-in-law rearranged my kitchen without asking, my brother left messes everywhere, and they constantly criticized the way I maintained my home. If we lived here, we'd really fix it up, my sister-in-law mused one day while eyeing my perfectly fine kitchen. Then came the hushed conversations that abruptly ended whenever I walked into the room. The exchanged glances when I mentioned my future plans for the condo. Something felt off, but I was too swamped with work to focus on it. And then, the breaking point. Last Friday, I left for work at my usual time, around 7 a.m. By 2 p.m., I got a frantic call from my neighbor asking if I was moving out, because someone was changing the locks on my condo. My stomach dropped. I raced home to find my sister-in-law supervising a locksmith while my brother was tossing my belongings onto the curb in trash bags. I barely had time to process the scene before my sister-in-law turned to me with a smug expression. "This condo belongs to my husband now," she declared. "Pack your trash and get out. Family property stays with real family." Apparently, they had convinced themselves that my grandparents had verbally promised the condo to my brother years ago, and that I had somehow manipulated them into changing the will. Total nonsense. But rather than argue, I simply smiled, took some pictures of my belongings strewn on the curb, nodded, and left. Their confidence wavered as I calmly got in my car and drove off. What they didn't know was that I had something they never bothered to check, the actual deed to the condo, safe and sound in my bank deposit box. My name was the only one on it. My grandparents had legally transferred ownership to me 2 years before they passed, while I was still paying rent, ensuring there would be no confusion or disputes over their wishes. I checked into a hotel, called my lawyer, and let the storm brew. 3 days of silence from me. Meanwhile, my phone blew up with texts from both of them. At first, it was smug gloating, enjoy being homeless, but then confusion crept in. Where are you staying? Eventually, desperation took hold. We need to talk ASAP. I didn't respond to a single one. This morning, I met with my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s who wasted no time in crafting a plan. By 9:30 a.m., we arrived at the condo with 2 police officers in tow to ensure everything remained civil. My sister-in-law answered the door in a bathrobe, confusion flashing across her face at the sight of the officers. But the moment she saw me standing behind them with my lawyer, her expression twisted into one of pure indignation. "You can't just show up with cops," she snapped. "We live here now." My lawyer stepped forward, all business. "I represent the legal owner of this property. I have documentation proving my client's ownership, and we're here to address your unlawful occupancy." My brother appeared behind her, suddenly looking very nervous. My lawyer handed them a formal notice explaining that they were illegally occupying my home. My sister-in-law launched into a tirade about family property and how my grandparents had always intended for my brother to have it. "Show me proof that this property belongs to you," my lawyer said coolly. That's when things got truly ridiculous. My brother mumbled something about verbal promises, while my sister-in-law stormed off and returned with a printed document, clearly something they had thrown together on a computer. It was a laughable attempt at forging a deed, complete with inconsistent fonts and wording that looked like it had been copied from a Google search. One of the officers actually chuckled as he examined it. This is an illegal document," he said flatly. Then he turned to my lawyer's paperwork. "However, this one is registered with the county." My sister-in-law's face drained of color. The smug confidence she had worn like armor crumbled in an instant. My brother looked like he was about to be sick. "This is impossible," she shrieked. "Your grandparents promised they put my husband's name on the deed 2 years ago." I finally spoke. While they were alive, fully sound of mind, and making their own choices, they put my name on the deed because I actually kept in touch with them, not just showed up for the funeral. The officers gave them 2 hours to gather their essentials and leave or face trespassing charges. My sister-in-law pleaded, saying they had nowhere to go. My brother just stared at the floor in silence. As they packed, I inspected the condo and discovered that they had already started renovations. They had removed some of my furniture, painted a wall, and even ordered new appliances. My lawyer documented everything for potential damages. By noon, they were gone. My sister-in-law shot daggers at me as she left, while my brother couldn't even look me in the eye. As soon as they were out, I called a locksmith to change the locks again. Now, I'm back in my home, surveying what's missing and what's been damaged. But most importantly, I have my space back. And my brother and his wife. Well, I'm sure they're realizing now that verbal promises don't hold up against legally signed deeds. It started with silence. 3 days without a single response from me after my brother and sister-in-law were forced to leave my condo. But my phone never stopped buzzing. At first, the messages from my sister-in-law were gloating, mocking me, celebrating what she thought was my downfall. Then came the confusion, followed quickly by anger. By the end of the afternoon, she had sent nearly 20 increasingly hostile texts, some thinly veiled threats, others outright furious accusations. My lawyer wasted no time preparing a restraining order. But that was just the beginning. A few hours later, my aunt called, her voice tight with concern. My sister-in-law was all over social media, playing the victim. Tearful, dramatic, and full of lies, she claimed I had manipulated my grandparents, stolen the condo, and left my poor brother homeless. She painted herself and my brother as victims of a cruel betrayal, rallying extended family members who had no idea what had really happened. And just like that, the family war began. Some relatives immediately took my brother's side, swallowing my sister-in-law's sob story without question. Blood is thicker than paper, one aunt scoffed, dismissing the legal deed like it was just a scrap of meaningless paper. Others, especially those who had actually been close to my grandparents, knew the truth and stood by me. My mother, however, was devastated. She called me in tears, begging for an explanation, asking why I had done this to my brother. It took over an hour of walking her through the legal documents, sending copies of the deed, and replaying the entire ordeal before she finally understood what had happened. But my sister-in-law wasn't done. 2 days later, I arrived home to a sight that left me speechless, a large for sale sign planted firmly in my front yard. I hadn't put my condo on the market. I hadn't even thought about it. A quick call to the real estate agency led to an even more infuriating discovery. My sister-in-law, in yet another act of brazen audacity, had contacted them pretending to be my wife. She claimed we were selling the condo and had already scheduled an open house for that weekend. Fortunately, the agency hadn't yet verified the ownership, so nothing had been finalized. After explaining the situation and presenting my deed, they immediately took the sign down, mortified by the deception. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get any crazier, I received a letter from a supposed lawyer representing my brother and sister-in-law. It was a demand: return the property to its rightful owners or face legal consequences. The letter was filled with vague threats about family trusts and verbal agreements, grasping at legal straws that didn't exist. I forwarded it to my own lawyer, who, after a brief silence, burst out laughing. "This isn't even real legal letterhead," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "I doubt a real attorney wrote this." That was the last straw. She filed a cease and desist order against them for harassment and moved forward with the restraining order. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law escalated things even further. She started showing up at my workplace, telling my co-workers the truth about how I had betrayed my own family. But the worst came when my neighbor sent me a chilling photo one morning, a random man, standing outside my condo at 6 a.m., peering through my windows. When confronted, my sister-in-law later claimed he was checking on her property. But he wasn't even my brother. That night, I called the police and installed security cameras. Then, for my own safety, I packed a bag and stayed with a friend for the weekend. A month passed. My lawyer pushed forward with the restraining order, and the court date was set. We had overwhelming evidence, security footage, statement from neighbors, testimony from the real estate agency, and, of course, screenshots of my sister-in-law's increasingly unhinged social media rants. There was no way they could talk their way out of this. Then, 2 days before the hearing, my brother called. He wanted to meet, alone. I was skeptical, but agreed, making sure a friend knew where I was. We met at a quiet coffee shop, and when I saw him, I barely recognized him. He looked exhausted, thinner, his shoulders slumped in defeat. For a long moment, he just stared into his coffee before finally speaking. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am." And then, he told me everything. The entire family property story. A fabrication. A carefully spun lie, created by none other than my sister-in-law. She had convinced him that our grandparents had verbally promised the condo to him, even showing him fake evidence she had fabricated. My brother, desperate and struggling financially, wanted to believe her. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right, he admitted. I just didn't want to see it. When they were confronted with the actual deed, the undeniable truth, he realized just how far she had taken things. And the real bombshell? They had separated. The moment he started questioning her, my sister-in-law's mask cracked. He discovered she had a history of similar stunts in previous relationships. When he confronted her about her lies, she exploded, accusing him of betraying their future. And then, he dropped the final revelation. "She was planning to sell your condo the second we got it," he confessed, his voice hollow. "She had already contacted real estate agents before we even changed your locks." While he had believed they were going to live there, she had been playing a different game entirely. She wanted to cash out, and fast. He showed me text messages proving she had orchestrated everything, from the fake legal threats to the unauthorized real estate listing. And that man outside my condo? Her ex. She had reconnected with him and had been taking his advice on how to claim properties through adverse possession, except she didn't even understand how that law worked. Now, my brother was crashing on a friend's couch, looking for work, and filing for divorce. He didn't ask for my forgiveness. He didn't ask for help. He just wanted me to know the truth before the hearing. I sat there, stunned. While it didn't excuse his actions, it at least explained them. I told him I needed time to process everything. The next day, my lawyer called with news that was almost too wild to believe. My sister-in-law had skipped town. Her social media was wiped clean, her accounts deleted. The supposed lawyer who had sent me that ridiculous demand letter denied ever representing her. My brother confirmed she had sent him a final text, saying he was dead to her for betraying their future and that she was starting fresh somewhere else. We still went to the hearing, and the judge granted my restraining order, though, at my request, not against my brother. I wasn't ready to be close to him again, but I wasn't shutting him out completely either. The family fallout was chaotic. Some relatives still saw me as the villain, clinging to their own version of events. But most, after learning the full story, finally understood. My parents apologized for doubting me. As for my condo, it was finally mine again, free from drama, free from chaos. I upgraded the security system, fixed everything they had ruined, and took back my space. A week later, my brother and I met again. He returned some of my belongings he had managed to save, and showed me the divorce paperwork he had filed. He had found a job and was slowly rebuilding his life.